Most people who see my videos on YouTube think to themselves, who is this annoying English guy shouting at me from across YouTube? But then there are some viewers, like Mark, who want to know more about my background and ask, is there a video where you talk about your background with languages? And actually, there isn't, and so I thought I'd make that for you today. I was going to do a nice video outside, but the English countryside being what it is, I think I'm going to have to go back inside to the studio, so sorry about that. Let's go. That's more like it. Right, now in case you were wondering, that fellow back there was Bertie, and I tried to bring him with me, but he wouldn't fit up the stairs, so I'll have to introduce you to him properly another day. He's got some good insights on language learning, by the way. So who am I? Thank you to all of you who have been asking this question. I've been making lots of videos. We've had many thousands of new subscribers recently, and so I thought it was about time that I just talked a little bit about myself and my background, because a lot of people, I kind of gather from the comments, do wonder to themselves, well, who is this guy? What makes him think he's qualified to talk about language learning and give advice on language learning and things like that, which is a fair question. So I'm going to just talk about my background just generally and with languages and travel and education and things like that, and then kind of culminating up to when I wrote and published these books of short stories and what I'm up to these days. I'm not going to go into any specific languages here. I'll save that for other videos, but I'll kind of touch on the chronology of that all. So I am from the UK, in case you couldn't tell. I am 40 years old, which is kind of hard to believe. And I didn't get started with languages until I was 19, and it happened all of a sudden. I grew up in Cambridge in the countryside, and then I moved to London to do a degree in jazz piano. So I'm a big musician. I've always had a big background in music. I played lots of instruments, but piano's always been my main thing. I played classical music since I was 6, and then got really into jazz, and then moved to London to kind of pursue a career as a jazz musician, which I did for many years into my 20s. I was kind of a gigging professional musician, which was super cool. Anyway, while I was in London, I just kind of opened my eyes to the world a little bit and realised that there's a lot of people out there. There's a big world out there, and us Brits tend to be quite insular culturally, and languages don't usually form part of a typical English upbringing, which was exactly the case with me. So I moved to London and I met all these people from different countries, and it was just amazing. I just became really interested in their background. There was one time in particular where I got a job in a cafe, and people I was working with were just from everywhere, and I was so impressed that they could speak English and each other's languages, and that really kind of got me started. So I sort of started picking up French by myself, and kind of just very traditional learning styles. Really, kind of got a textbook and just read it. That's all I knew. And then around the same time, so after my first year of university, I think I was a bit confused, and I decided to take a year off. And at that exact same time, my girlfriend broke up with me, my girlfriend of 2 years, which really sent me spinning, and I ended up moving to Paris. I basically ran away to Paris because I'd already become interested in languages, and she had also gone to spend part of her gap year in France. So I kind of had this romantic vision of Paris, which turned out to be a bit of a disappointment, if I'm honest, once I got there. But anyway, I did go there. I spent 6 months there in Paris learning French and just kind of living Parisian life. And that was my first taste of language learning. So I got my French to a pretty good level. And that gave me a lot of confidence to think, okay, well, I can learn languages now. So after my year off, I went back to London, and I carried on with my jazz degree. I went back into year 2 of 4 years, so 3 more years of my music degree. That whole time is a complete blur. I mean, I think I already realized at that point that musical life wasn't for me. I had my suspicions, but I was still very young, so I was figuring things out. And then, but one of the things I got from London was I just got this huge education about the world. So I met a guy who we became best friends. He was from Spain, from the Canary Islands, and so I learned Spanish by practicing a lot with him at the beginning, which was great. He introduced me to some Brazilians who were also musicians. So I ended up kind of combining, I think my love of music ended up kind of deviating into Latin music a lot. So I got really into playing salsa, which is the Spanish angle, and then Bossa Nova and Samba, which is the Portuguese angle. And then so by that point I was, early 20s, and I already spoke French, Spanish, Portuguese really well. And so I'd really had the language bug. So I finished university, and then I went off to live in Brazil for 6 months, kind of following a dream.
But I kind of ended up getting just didn't know what I was doing with my life really, and so I studied in Brazil. I went down to Argentina for 3 or 4 months, which was also really cool. And then I came back to the UK, where I just kind of went back to do the music thing. So I started playing music a bit more, and then I also started teaching music a little bit. So I would teach guitar in a school, which was quite fun. But more and more, I was moving in this direction where I knew that the musical life wasn't for me, which was difficult because all of my friends, I had this huge community of friends who were all professional musicians, classical, jazz, Latin musicians. But it just wasn't sitting right for me, and it's quite difficult for me to explain why. I think it just didn't gel with my personality. Who knows? To this day, I don't really understand it. So I kind of ambled around for a few years, traveling a bit. I learned a little bit of Japanese around that time, went to visit Japan once on holiday. And then there came a point where I was like, right, I've got to make a big change here because things aren't working out. I always had in the back of my mind to go and teach English because I love languages, I've got some experience teaching, and I love travel, so why not marry that all up, right? So I ended up getting a job in a really crappy English school in Japan, and they sort of brought me out to Japan, and so I just started working, changed my life completely, moved to the other side of the world, and started life as an English teacher, which was, it was exciting, just to kind of live in Japan and to try this completely new career. To get into teaching, I did a CELTA course, which is a Certificate of English Language Teaching to Adults run by Cambridge University, and I absolutely loved it. It was one of the best months of my life. It was so much fun to I think it was doing something with languages that I really liked, and I was kind of learning how to teach. I actually struggled quite a lot on that course because I already had my way of learning languages, and then this course was sort of imposing how languages should be taught according to their system. And the whole point of doing that course is that you do things their way, right? And so I did actually struggle at the beginning to come around to that. But then I did it, I passed obviously, went to Japan, and then the course of the next few years was basically me becoming very serious about teaching. So I loved teaching, I loved being in Japan, I loved my students there. I'm getting all nostalgic just thinking about it. So I went quite serious down the path of learning to teach professionally. So I'd done my certificate, I went on to do a diploma, which is called the Delta. And then I immediately then started a master's degree in applied linguistics. So it was like this kind of this standard progression, pretty quick. I think I was quite keen to do all this stuff. But I became quite an experienced teacher, and I also moved into teacher training. I spent a lot of time teaching young learners as well, which is great to kind of learn to manage classrooms and things like that. And that spanned like my entire time in Japan and a few years afterwards as well. And by the time I stopped teaching, which we haven't got to yet, but by the time I stopped that professionally as an English teacher, I was pretty experienced, and I really, really loved it. I also quite liked the academic side, and so a lot of the time, these days I think about what it is that I bring to the language learning community, or what I try to bring, what I try to do. And the way that I like to think about it is really that I had this experience learning languages myself in my 20s, which was very, very kind of improvised, disorganized, just figuring things out as I went along, figuring out what worked for me. But then I also had this experience of teaching and being very highly trained as a teacher, but then also going down the academic route and knowing the theory, knowing the literature. And it's always struck me that that's a fairly rare combination, because you get a lot of teachers, a lot of teacher academics, but it rarely crosses over into multilingualism as well. I've always been struck by how English teachers in particular, of course there are exceptions, and often some very notable exceptions, but on the whole, people that work in the English language teaching sphere generally do not know how to speak multiple languages themselves. And I know this is kind of touchy ground, and it's not my intention to criticize anyone here, but it's just a generality. And I often feel, and I'm getting way off track here, but I often feel that a lot of discussion around language learning misses a big part of the picture. And for me, it is really important for teachers to have extensive experience as learners, because language learning ultimately is a kind of it's a task of managing yourself and your emotions. The language is rarely the difficult thing. What's difficult is the self-management and the motivation and the mindset. And so that's what I think that teachers can actually most help with, necessitating then learning languages themselves. But maybe that's a topic for another day. But regardless, that is the kind of skill set that I felt that I had that was kind of unique. It's the teaching, academia, but also the language learning experience, because by that point I'd learned 4 or 5 languages to a pretty good level, and I felt like I had something to say. So from Japan, where I was kind of teaching and doing the academic stuff, I then kind of faced a bit of a crossroads, and I decided to move to the Middle East, taking a job promotion where I moved more into teacher training and management. I lived in Qatar for a year and a half doing that, basically kind of teaching center management and teacher training. I finished my master's there. Then I took another promotion and moved to Egypt, where it was kind of more management staff and some more teacher training, things like that. I was actually in charge of a teaching operation for the whole of Egypt when I was there, which was quite cool. And obviously I sort of dabbled in Arabic as well when I was there. But it was during that time when I was living in Qatar that I started my website, which was called I Will Teach You a Language. At the beginning, this was a blog, and I just blogged about language learning. And I think personally that it is the experience that I had of teaching and learning languages that was kind of what made what I was doing quite unique, because generally online, at least in that period, you either had people talking very anecdotally about languages, like, oh hey, I did this and it worked, or else you've got people talking very academically. The literature says this and studies suggest, which is kind of it's fine. But what I was trying to do was kind of marry the two and talk about language learning in a practical sense, but informed by experience of teaching and theory as well. And so as I was blogging and doing this stuff, that's when everything kind of started to take off. Not quickly, not by a long shot, but I kept it up. And after a couple of years, I had some real traction. So that started to grow, and then basically got to a point where what I was earning from my blogging activities was more than I was making from my full-time job. So around that time, I basically decided to quit, move back to the UK, and that's when I started doing what I do now full-time. Of course, it didn't look anything like that back then. But it was around that time that I started experimenting with different things within the business. So I was still blogging, I was making the occasional YouTube video, and I wrote my first books of short stories. And of course, they didn't look like this initially. At the beginning, they looked, I think they still look quite cool, but they were very kind of rough and ready. And so I wrote these books of short stories because I wanted to make something that I felt was missing in the market, which was quality graded readers. And by quality, I mean like fun, interesting, modern, fresh, written for learners, rather than what I always felt was out there, especially in the English market, which was basically just you get all these old classics that were out of copyright and you kind of just rehash them and present them as a graded reader. Say, hey, here's a book to read. It's like, yeah, but I don't want to read Jane Austen, I want to read something fun. So I started writing these books, and immediately they were really successful, and so I made them into multiple languages. And I was just self-publishing them at this point. But interestingly, one of the things that I got most positive feedback from the books, apart from the stories themselves, was actually what I write in the beginning of the book, which was this chapter on how to read effectively. And I have something in here which is called the 5-step, or the 6-step reading process. And so it wasn't just writing the stories, I was actually also kind of writing about how to learn, how to read, the kind of the method side of things, right? So even here, I was kind of bringing in my experience of teaching and some academic stuff as well, because I'm talking about intensive and extensive reading, having read all the literature myself and knowing what's what. And so for whatever reason, this kind of combination of stuff, the books just really became very popular. And then I started speaking with Teach Yourself about the possibility of joining forces, because they thought they basically suggested, well, look, let's take this work that you've been doing and let's just bring it out all over the world, which is exactly what ended up happening. It took many years, but we joined forces. They made the books actually look really good, and just bring it up to proper publishing professional standards. And the great thing that they've done is with distribution. So you can walk into any good bookshop in the world now and you'll find these books in the language section, which is, for me, it's just a really wonderful thing. And I remember the first time I walked into Foyles in London and I saw my books on the shelves. It was one of those moments where you always think about that moment. I've become a published author. I wonder what it would be like to see my books on the shelves. And I remember kind of being a conscious witness to that moment when it happened, which was really cool. And the things have evolved a lot since then, and we have over 20 books out now. And so that kind of brings us up really to the present day. And I've just kind of been doing more and more of the same. I won't go into too much detail about what I do with story learning now, other than to say that what I do now with my story learning method, which is teaching through stories, is basically the kind of culmination of all of the language learning and teaching and academic stuff that I've done. And what I try to do with story learning is offer people a different way of learning. I'm very clear that it is not for everybody. If you're not a fan of sitting down and reading, it's not going to be good for you at all. But a lot of people don't get on with traditional learning for whatever reason, and they're looking for something that they can take a little bit more control over. And so with story learning, I kind of recognize all of these struggles myself, having been through it. And again, what I try to do is kind of take my experience of being frustrated with multiple languages and trying to figure out a way of doing it, and then kind of combine that with my experience of teaching and the theoretical side of it to create something that is solid. And so that's what I try and do with story learning. And a point of confusion is often people think that my books are actually the story learning method, but they're not really. These are graded readers that use stories. But my story learning method mostly focuses on my courses that I create, which are on my website. And those are courses to learn a language from scratch using stories. And those are kind of full courses like you'd expect from a textbook. So that is kind of how I apply story learning as a method. It's in my courses rather than in my books. And that's what I kind of continue to do today. And with my videos on YouTube, what I'm trying to do is kind of build a larger audience and who can and just kind of bring in a larger audience to this, to what I do in my world. And I'm trying to continue to build this world around stories. And then I guess to finish off the story then is with languages, because I've kept learning languages and there's so many gaps to fill in. It's kind of difficult to do it all chronologically while still kind of making sense. But around, during this time, I guess the last sort of 5 to 10 years, I've also been learning other languages. So I spent a lot of time learning Cantonese. I learned Arabic when I was in Egypt. I've done a lot of kind of shorter language missions that I've filmed on YouTube. They're in playlists somewhere on my channel. You can see me going to Bangkok and learning Thai, and then doing a 3-month self-study project to learn Italian, which was really successful, using story learning, by the way. And that's all on there. And then I picked up like smatterings of German. I was the student on the Michel Thomas Korean course as well. So yeah, so language learning has just been a huge part of my life. But I'd say generally, as things are evolving now, it's kind of, for me now, I'm moving to a point where I'm more interested, or I find more purpose and more reward and fulfillment in actually helping other people learn languages than doing it myself. Because there's a sense in which I've been learning languages for 20 years. It's like, I could keep learning new languages, but there are other things I want to do in life, and top of that list is helping other people, which I'm very, very lucky to be able to do with my website, with my books, my courses, and just all this activity. Most recently, like as I record this, which is, where are we? August 2021. One of the things I'm most enjoying actually is kind of creating new content on YouTube. I'm having a lot of fun just dreaming up ideas about language-related content, and kind of just putting that out into the world. The one last thing I'd say, I think I keep saying this is the last thing. This probably will be the last thing. I have a fantastic team behind me at Story Learning. It's easy to lose track of numbers. I believe we have about 12 people right now on the Story Learning team, plus dozens of freelancers and contractors we work with. In any one year, we work with hundreds and hundreds of people. And, I I'm quite good with coming up with the ideas, but all the credit needs to go to my fantastic team who actually execute on the stuff that we create. Whether it's the product team who work on our story learning challenges or build the courses, or else I have a team of people that help me here with YouTube. You have people who talk to customers regularly, who work on our podcast, like the StoryLearning Spanish podcast, for example. I mean, there's so much, and I couldn't possibly go through everybody, but that is something that I find incredibly fulfilling. It's growing a business to the point where, like, the bigger it gets, the more I can produce, the more I can make, the more I can help people. And for me, it's a very, very exciting, rewarding thing to do. And so, I'd like to thank you for watching this far and to support this journey. If you've enjoyed what you've heard this far and you'd like to keep in touch, then the best thing to do would be to join up to my email newsletter. I send regular emails which people routinely tell me that they really, really love. I try to make them very, very interesting and helpful. You'll also get access to things like special discounts when we launch new courses, early notice about new books, lots and lots of benefits there. So sign up to my email newsletter, and that way we can keep in touch.